Today, we've got a very special guest. We've got Melissa Perri, who I'm going to let Ode introduce Melissa here in just a moment. But first off, I do want to, as we're pivoting over here to introduce Melissa and start our conversation there, I want to also welcome Ode Maras, who has been volunteering here with Product Coffee and Product Camp Atlanta for quite some time and reached out to Melissa to ask her to join us today. And Ode is going to lead our discussion. Ode is the Director of Product and Marketing for Sunmi, which is a company that's based in China but has a growing North American presence as well. She's leading the product and the marketing operations and really a lot of the U.S. innovation here in based out of Atlanta as well. So Ode, welcome, and I'm going to let you take it away. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you everybody for coming. And I see Melissa. Thank you, Melissa, for joining us this morning at Product Coffee. So I don't know if I need to actually introduce Melissa. Melissa Perri is, I think, one of our mentor, one of our mentors in product management. And today we really wanted to have a conversation about her book, Escaping the Build Trap, which was released a couple of years ago, but I think it's still, and we saw it this morning with all the conversations and the questions that everybody raised between 7:30 and 8, still very, very relevant to a lot of organization. So we're gonna get into the discussions. I encourage you to send your questions through the chat. And we'll try to address them. This is really a conversation. So Melissa, thank you very much for joining today. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. Thank you again. So first of all, I wanted to have your feeling right now on product management. So you've been in product management for I don't wanna age you or any kind of way, but 10 plus years, I'm going to say. And as I said, you've shaped the product management discipline throughout this few years, not only through your book, but also through all the activities you've done. You've participated in a lot of product meetups and mentoring groups. You're now part of Harvard Business School, and you're a senior lecturer at Harvard Business School training MBA students on product management. So you're really part of this pillars of product management in our discipline today. So in the past 10 plus years that you've been in product management, can you tell us how you've seen the discipline evolved and see where are we today in 2021?
Yeah, I think the good news is that people are starting to recognize product management as a critical part of their infrastructure in companies these days, which was very different than 10 years ago when nobody really knew what a product manager was, at least most of the people I talked to. So that's good. Not that it wasn't around. It's been around for a very long time, but I think we're finally, getting acknowledgement and people are understanding that it's critical. Like a few data points I put out there, like I work with a ton of recruiters because everybody hits me up and asks me, can I hire a product manager or can I hire chief product officers? The executive recruiters say that chief product officer roles are the most in-demand ones and they can't fill them because there's just not enough people in the leadership positions that have had that experience and that are marketing themselves really that way so that they can fill it. So overwhelming demand to put product leadership roles in there. And I think that's a really good sign as well that, it's starting to mature. People are starting to recognize the importance of it. It's not just, hey, let's report to the CTO or the CMO anymore. Like we have a seat at the table and people realize that it's a critical role and they need it in order to move their businesses forward. I know regular recruiters as well just have the hardest time filling all the product roles. I do think now that that's true. We have to start looking as well at how do we get people into product management and how do we help them make that first step into the career. Yesterday was our last class at HBS for the semester. So that was fun. But, my students are all applying for jobs and trying to get them. And they're like, everybody's asking for 5 years of experience. Like, where do we start? And I think that's our biggest issue, and something that I've heard a lot of other people talk about as well, is what do we do to help people make that transition? I think some people luck into this role because they're in an organization going through a transformation. And if you're in the right place at the right time, it's like, ta-da, you're a product manager now. And a lot of people came to the role that way, or shifted into the role that way. And that's great, but we need to also have a way to get people like straight out of college, straight out of business school, or, you know, starting their careers, transitioning into that. And I felt like I was lucky because I got that opportunity with Capital IQ to start and train from them. Like, they took me right out of school. So we need more of that, and there's just not enough of that in the industry. So lots of stuff about like the people aspects of it. I think people are seeing the importance of it from a like practice standpoint. I think we're starting to mature on our processes. I think people understand that like you need to go and talk to customers. You can't just sit back and not talk to customers. I feel like that was the big fight like 12 years ago when we were talking about this for the first time. It's like, go talk to your customers. And now it's like, duh, of course I want to talk to my customers. So I'm glad that it's now a duh moment for people, but it wasn't. So we've come a long way there. I think a lot of people understand they need a test now. I don't, like, when I started consulting, everybody was like, we can't possibly test. We can't do all this MVP stuff that you guys talk about. And now, like, if you're not doing it, you're old fashioned, like you're out of scope. It's not that everybody's doing it well, but I think everybody understands you need to do it. So that's good. So a lot of the stuff we were pushing for, you know, over a decade ago of, you know, test and learn, talk to your customers, measure success, get the data for things. All that seems to be like common sense now when we think about product management, and there's not as big of a fight about it, like about actually doing it. Now it's just doing it well. But then I think the pieces that are still missing in a lot of places, especially super large organizations, are understanding the product strategy and how to cascade it down into portfolio strategy, how to make sure that ties back into you know, good processes, and how that feedback loop goes up and down the organization, not just across, not just within the team. So how do we bring everything together as like a cohesive strategy, a cohesive portfolio, and move it forward? Those are the pieces I see people struggle with more now, and they're complicated problems. They're addressable. Like I've done a lot of work with them. I've seen them work, but and it's just like, sometimes the cultures don't make it readily apparent that that's what you need to do. I think some organizations are still like coming towards what we call like product thinking, like how to think about products in the way that we're doing. Like, the mindset hasn't fully changed. The practices have changed, but the mindset hasn't fully changed. And I think that needs to catch up a little bit. But I see it in a lot of growth stage organizations, smaller organizations, ones that are like more software native, like they get those things. I work with CEOs a lot, and they're like, yeah, common sense. Like, we need a product strategy. Help me build it. Let's go. You'll always deal with your crazy founders who think that they know it all, but most CEOs, most professional CEOs, and most of the ones who don't want to do the product all themselves understand the importance of having a good like chief product officer in there to help create the strategy, help usher it forward, and they understand the impact on their business. So I think that's a big piece of it. But I think, I mean, like, looking back, like, we've come so far. It's nice not to have the same arguments over and over again. And I think like the next 10 years, I think all these things I'm talking about are going to be common sense again too.
Very exciting, very exciting. There's a lot of things to unpack, like here, I think. So the first thing that you mentioned is that there are more and more hiring of CPO roles. I know that a few years ago, you mentioned at some point that you had a lot of calls with a lot of companies at Produx Lab that wanted to become more product led, but didn't necessarily want to make this big shift of moving from output to outcome, right? And so I think this morning there were still some questions about how do we do this? Like, I'm in an organization where we're still doing output and building features that don't necessarily make sense for the market. How do we move to outcome? Would you have some high level advice for those of us that are in these companies, either product leaders, either sometimes individual contributors, to do this transition, this shift?
Yeah. Like, I still think that's a big struggle. And I think it is for many large organizations. Like, it's really hard to move 50,000 people in a different direction than they were going, right? Like, it's really, really hard. I've tried. I've tried many, many times. I think you can get, and it's interesting because when you get into really large corporation talk, each business line can act like a completely different company. And at some of the largest companies, I see like a couple of business lines doing fantastically well, like really understand the product stuff, hiring the right people. And then same company, different division, nope, doesn't get it all, right? It's funny because I get called by all of them individually as well. And I'm like, which one are you? You're the same company, but nobody talks to each other. So I think that's one of the issues with large corporations is like, we're not really bringing all that together. Like, we tend to silo ourselves with business lines and we don't actually look across the business lines to learn from within, right? So that's why I get called by 5 different divisions and I'm like, you have a good one doing it over there. Why don't you go learn from them? Like, they'll help you. So that's one of the issues. Now, even smaller companies too, like I've seen this issue in like 5,000 people companies and 100-person companies. Like it's not just large corporations. I think large corporations are harder to switch. I've seen smaller corporations make the switch very, very quickly, very, very easily by hiring a very experienced chief product officer who gets it, can persuade the CEO, works with them really well, and starts to implement best practice. And I've seen organizations with like a couple thousand people switch over to outcomes like within the year, right? Like that mindset goes in, it goes really fast. But it takes a certain person to like lead that forward, right? Somebody who's really got that transformation type mindset and gets product and really can push it forward. So that's totally possible. One thing I've learned that I just told my Harvard students last year too, is just like, if your CEO is not on board with any of this, nothing's ever going to change. Like it's not like but you have to argue with it about in a way that they actually get, right? They have to understand that product actually moves their financial objectives forward. So that's like when the great CPOs come in, they're talking in that language. And if you're a product leader, like I think that's the most important thing that you can learn. Your CEO does not care about your MVPs and talking to customers. They may throw these words out to you, but they do not care. Like it's just they're trying to plug a gap. They see something not working. They throw terms out that they hear and they think like that's going to get them there. But really what they want to see is like a connected product strategy that tells them how it's going to result in revenue and cost savings. Like that's only thing that they want to hear. That's what they want to see. They want to see how their vision is going to be manifested through a product strategy that results in revenue increases and cost savings. And if you can talk like that, they don't honestly care most of the time about what you're doing. Like some of them do, and that's where you get into trouble, where you can't make these shifts, right? Because they're not doing their job. That's not a CEO's job to tell the product team like how they should be operating. And if they care that much about it, there's a problem, right? There's usually some baggage or it's not the right person to really lead it. But if they really are a great CEO and they understand like their objectives, it's very easy to work with them as a product leader if you talk in their language, right? If you help move it forward. When you start bringing product strategy into into those outcomes that they want to see, like revenue and cost, that's what starts shifting the narrative, right? That's what happens. So a lot of times we gravitate towards speaking in terms of what we know, right? Of the things that we're doing and the outputs we're doing. And I see a lot of product presentations even just result in that. Like you get a chance to talk to the executive team and you explain how you talk to customers and you built this MVP and you did X, Y, and Z. And they start to like tune out because they don't care about that. Like they just care about what that actually means. So I do think part of it starts with changing our own language. And this is the biggest thing that I teach in my like CPO accelerator program for VPs of product trying to move into the C-suite is like, you need to talk in the language that the executives actually care about. And they do care about outcomes. Like that is actually what they care about. They talk about outputs because they are trying that's what drives an outcome, right? You have to have an output to actually have an outcome. But they are going to talk about that in lieu of understanding what the outcome actually is. So if you could start to fill in those gaps for them, they start to come around. For individual contributors, it's going to be really hard to shift an entire organization. What I always tell them is that you start with you. And one of the biggest mistakes I see individual contributors making, especially in an organization that's not super receptive to, turning around, is they go in kind of, I mean, I did this too. So like, I know from firsthand experience, it doesn't work, like guns blazing, being like, you're doing it wrong. Like, this is not how it works. And I always say, like, just try to change the way that you talk about your work. The most effective thing I've ever seen anybody do is don't talk about scrapping all the things you're working on. Biggest mistake you can make. Everybody starts to panic. They're like, you can't just stop working on these things, right? They're already committed. We've already thought about it. Don't do that. It'll screw everybody up. But start to ask people, why are we building this, right? So that I can understand how to better prioritize my backlog, right? Something like that, just simple. Don't make it scared. Like, don't make it scary. Don't make it very unassuming. And then say, okay, also second question, when we release this, what's going to happen? What do you expect to change? Like, what numbers are going to go up? What's the objective? Okay. So if I release this and we see a 40% increase of adoption of this feature, would you consider that success? Like, is that good? Yes or no? And if you start asking those questions to your leaders and to the people around you, you'll start to come to a sense of what success looks like. And then just build the thing that you're working on, measure that, and then go back and ask yourselves, like, did we hit it? Right? Because that starts a whole conversation of, if we didn't, why didn't we hit it? And now you're getting into, okay, here's all the things that have been blocking us from really focusing on the outcomes. What are we doing wrong? What could we be moving forward? How do we make sure we actually hit it next time? What should we do to fix it? So those conversations tend to not scare people if you start like that, right? Once you start talking about how everything in an organization needs to change, organizations get scared. Leaders get scared. People think like you're going to stop working. And if you do go on a massive transformation, I've been a part of many, many, many of them at this point, and you're teaching everybody to like do product management well, to change, things slow down considerably. And leaders aren't used, like, they're not really receptive to that unless they're like super bought in. But I always tell them, if they want to embark on this challenge, like, no, you're not going to get the same throughput of things being released as you typically would, because people are learning and it takes a while to learn. And it also takes a while to do it well. So it should be, a hockey stick over time, but it'll go like this and then it'll go up. If they're not ready to do that transformation, they're not bought into that, they're not going to want to hear about how all the things need to change right now, right? If they are bought into that, then you have to start with the expectation of things are going to change slowly. And then all of a sudden we're going to start taking off. That's like a big misconception that I see with people going through this change as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I see that, it seems like it resonates with some of our folks here connected. So I love the fact that you're really shifting the focus between, like, from features and from just the product to more like, what is the strategy? How is it related to the business and where we want to go? I think as product managers, it's very hard to learn this portion. We're usually very, I'm going to say, compartmentalized. We're just looking at our features or looking at our product. It's hard really to take a step back and thinking about, how does this benefit really the company? So I like the fact that you're saying that this is also something that you emphasize in your CPO training, basically, because it seems to me that as an individual contributor first and as a manager after, it's something that is very hard to learn and hard to grasp, really. You have to put yourself in the shoes of the CEO. I'm not saying that product managers are the CEO of the product, that's not, but you have to put yourself in the shoes of the CEO there, and really think about the whole company. So it is very difficult. Any advice from you on how to improve in terms of strategy thinking?
Yeah. So like the best, so I sit on a board now of a company. So I'm on the other side now. So I get to watch everybody's product strategy presentations. And like, I'm almost always the only product person on the board. It's usually salespeople and finance people. It's one thing to note, like most executives are not functional leaders, right? Or your board is just going to be financial people, usually from your VCs or whoever your backers are. If you're a public company, past CEOs, presidents of boards, but they all lean towards financials. So if you get comfortable with understanding financials, that's really important. The biggest skill I think that people who rise up through product management and then become CPOs need to learn is like modeling, financial modeling for, hey, if we release this feature, right? Like the way that I think about like building strategy at that level is you're basically determining like, how am I going to grow my revenue or reduce my costs? You get two factors usually for an organization to reach the vision. You have to be in line with the vision. So it's all these factors. What's the best strategy for me? Do I go up market? Do I go down market? Is there an opportunity for me to expand geographically? Like there's all these different strategy components you could possibly do. What you want to do is try to assess them and figure out what makes logical sense based on your current product portfolio. What's the best way to, take that next step to increase your revenue? Then what you want to do is figure out what are the needs. If let's say you go up market, what are the needs of the up market that we don't actually solve for? Product management skills right there, right? Probably going to test it a little bit, do some customer interviews, figure that out, refine those problems you want to solve, what you have to do, understand the scope of that. Is this a 2-year project? Is this a 1-year project? Like obviously you're going to be releasing up towards that. You want to MVP it, but sometimes you can't just bring it to market in 3 months, like especially when it's that big of a push. And then there's the question of, okay, what's the timing on that? So then we got to get into financial modeling, which is like, what's the minimum amount that we need to build to actually sell this? Once we're able to sell this, how much would we price it for? So there's a bunch of pricing and packaging components in there. Then you're modeling off of like, what can sales currently do? So you have to go talk to the sales team to do that, figure out what the capacity is. Do we actually have to hire people? Do we not? Do we want to do that increased spend? Do we have to retrain people? So there's logistics of like bringing this to market that are very different sometimes than what we're doing as an individual contributor. That's usually the hardest part, I think, for people to learn. But you kind of want to approach it from like thinking about like, okay, I went from releasing features that would increase these metrics. I'm now releasing bigger components or bigger products that will increase revenue and cost. How do I model that? It's the same way that you'd be trying to model like out an increase in adoption, but just with money, right? With money pushes on that side. So similar logic, but we forget about that, I think, when it gets to be higher level. And it's the same type of thing of like trying to get into probability of like chances of success and figuring out like how much capacity you could actually take on and that kind of realm. So what I'd say is like, get really comfortable with understanding like financial basics. The more you could talk in this language, like the more executives start to pay attention, honestly, like they stop tuning you out. That's where I've seen people be a lot more successful. I'd also look at like reading like a financial primer book. I had one, I got to remember what it is. Actually, it might be behind me. Let me just check. No, that one wasn't a good one. I tried one and didn't like it.
You can send it to
but like if you just go to, if you just
Yeah.
look like simple accounting, balance sheets, profit and loss, that type of stuff, if you understand that, that really helps. The other part I'd say is start to understand how your business is run and your business strategy. VCs operate very differently than private equity companies do, operate very differently than public companies do versus nonprofits. Each one of those have different goals and different ways that they're running and different time horizons. Like for example, if you work for a VC-backed company, depending on who the investor is, I learned this by working with some of them, didn't know this before I did, but like some of them were like, we're only going to hold you for 3 years. So by the end of 3 years, you either have to get to IPO or a nice exit, or we'll pass you on to somebody else. Like that's a really common VC thesis. It's a really common private equity thesis as well. So like if you understand how your board runs and how your investors run and how your company runs in that perspective, it also tells you why people make crazy decisions. Like you may be sitting there going, I do not understand why we're not investing in this tech debt. Like our platform is broken. Why are we not putting money in it? And it's because they only care about revenue growth for the next 3 years because they're going to sell you to somebody else and then they'll have to deal with the tech debt, right? Like once you understand that, crazy decisions start to make more sense. And you're like, oh, now I get why everybody can't see what I'm passionate about. And that was pretty frustrating for me, I think, until I started understanding like why people were like not caring about some of the most basic, good practice product management things. And a lot of it comes down to like the financial engineering of your company.
Interesting. So we had a question coming to us before the meeting, and it was from Mark Hisbit. I don't know if he's connected right now. So basically, he was asking, when you have investors that want to have quick revenue, how do you kind of build to learn and not just build to earn, right? To your terms in the product. It's a hard move out there. So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, like the investors I've worked with have always embraced the concept of MVPs and de-risking stuff. I think what you have to do is get them aligned with how risky it is to just build that it doesn't result in the revenue they expect, right? Like when I have a conversation when I'm part of the board and people are like, we're doing this, we're exploring this. Usually the words MVP never come up at a board level. They shouldn't, and it should never come up with your investors. Like, don't do that. What you usually would say is like, we're investigating what it's going to take to actually move up market. So we're defining what the product roadmap looks like. You're usually testing in that moment. Like you're behind the scenes testing, but you're telling them we're investigating, right? And they understand that because they're like, they'll come from consultant backgrounds, and consultants investigate and do the analysis all the time. So all you have to do is say like, we're doing the analysis, we're testing this, we're doing this with beta groups, we're doing, whatever, we're starting to get good feedback on this. And we know that it's leaning towards this direction, or we're investigating these things, right? But it's not looking good. So we're thinking that we might have to move down market instead. There's bigger opportunity there. We look at that space. They're usually totally fine with that. I think if you go in there and tell them that your roadmap is only building to learn, they're going, but we have to earn. So it's like, you need to change your language. Like I never see anybody get upset with like, oh yeah, we're investigating what it takes to go this way. We think we want to move up market. The space looks strong. We're seeing if we can actually penetrate it, if we can move into it. All of a sudden everybody's like, yeah, cool. And you're back there just doing your MVPs, doing your testing, learning about everything, doing what you need to do. And the next board meeting you come, or the next update to the executives, you go, we tested this, we did X, Y, and Z, we did that. There is no traction here. We're not going to be able to do it, but we're going to pivot now to go investigate something else. That I have not seen anybody get mad at. That I've never seen anybody like start to lose hope with. I think it's like, we have to communicate when we're talking about testing and learning as like a means to an end, not the whole activity. And I see that get misconstrued sometimes. I've worked with a lot of large organizations where, even back in the day, but even now, I don't see them go much further, where we teach them how to test and we teach them how to do MVPs, but they never get out of testing mode. They never move on, right? And that's a big thing. Like you should be getting out there to see if it's going to work, to see if it's really working. We did this at a healthcare company. We were testing like a couple $100 million idea. And it did take it took maybe 6 months to test it, longer, right? To make sure that we actually had traction. We started with a small beta group, but everybody was so bought into this idea. They're like, of course it takes 6 months to figure out if it's the right way to go. It's going to take us longer to build it, but we're going to see if we can actually do this. And we basically concierged everything behind the scenes, did it all manually before we started to build it. But it was a really big thing. Like a lot of people talk about, how do you, like, you can't MVP or you can't test really big ideas. Like you can, we did it. I've done it a bunch of times. It's just like an order of magnitude longer than you typically do. But when it's going to result in a couple $100 million push, you test things, right? Like you get longer. But when we put it out there, we wrote out a whole analysis about why should we go into this market, right? Like, why should we try this? What's the upside of the revenue if we actually succeed? Why do we think it's a strong idea? And there was a lot of analysis that went into it from like a market perspective, from a data perspective, before we even crafted the test. And then once we got buy-in for that, then we crafted the test and we said, here's our phases of rollout. Phase 1, manually test it with 10 customers, make sure it's something that they would really buy into before we go even further, right? And then we did that in hospital settings and things like that, making sure that we had the quality control, making sure that we had the right tools to actually implement it. And once we felt secure with that, then you move on to phase 2. but we didn't talk about just like testing to learn. I think that's something we need to keep internally as product managers. And we talk about like, we are proving that this is the right thing to do, more to the executives.
Very interesting. I think it is also related closely to what you called in your book the real definition of done. That I was start to realize that I've never implemented it myself as a product management, nor seen it applied in companies where you basically say that ahead of launching, a new initiative, a new feature, a new product, whatever it is, you have to define what is going to be your success criteria, then reevaluate your success criteria, and then potentially withdraw the product or the feature or the outcome if it doesn't succeed. I think it's very hard for companies to do that, because once you've invested a lot of money and you realize that you haven't gotten to like the success that you wanted, it kind of feels like a failure. So how do you overcome this impression that you built something maybe potentially for nothing and you failed?
Yeah, I think that's why, like, if we focus on testing early, hopefully those failures aren't big, right? If we can learn those things up front, it's really easy to walk back. But let's say we spent 2 years building something that didn't quite pan out. The question is why, right? And I've seen people get upset about this. Obviously, there's a lot of like, sorry, the sun is like directly in my eyes. I'm just going to pull this down. It's like the hazard is sitting right here. I've seen places where there's a lot of sunk cost fallacy in this, right? Like, let's put it that way. You're never going to know how something's going to react until you put it in market, but you can de-risk that not knowing, like how much you don't know, right? Going up to it. But at the end of the day, like, you just don't know until it is out there. Hopefully we get 80% sure. Hopefully we get 90% sure. But sometimes we're 40% sure and there's just no way of knowing. Like, we did as much as we possibly could to de-risk. And when you agree as a team, I think, to do it on 40% of the data, like, you have to understand that there's a 60% chance it doesn't work, right? And we got to start looking at it like that. It's not a failure. It was like, we tried it and it didn't work. And honestly, those are conversations that I was shocked to hear on the board, where people weren't upset. Like, if you make a compelling case about like why something didn't work and what you learned from it and what you're doing differently, most people go, okay, that's a shame that it didn't work, but what are we going to do now? And that's all they care about, right? It's like, cool, what's next, right? How do we come back from this? What do we do next? And I think like every single company has gone through that. When I do presentations for executives, like, I always talk about, like, I bring Netflix up a lot because they've done a lot of really big things that have failed, right? But they're still successful, still a very successful business. And these were like early days, mid days, big days. Like, a lot of the stuff that they've done has not panned out every time. And that's like just a natural cause of being a business. Like, everything that you were going to do is not going to be successful at the end of the day. So like with Netflix, I talk about in the book, like, they built the whole Roku thing, scrapped it, said we didn't want to do that. Like, that was a big investment. Like, that was a lot of money they spent on that, but it was the right thing to do for their company, right? And when you bring it back to that, this was the right thing to do for our company, or this didn't work because the market wasn't there. What can we do next? Next time we're going to do a much better job investigating the market, right? Next time we're going to do a much better job testing early. That's usually what people care about. So when I think about the definition of done, it's like, you set those so that you're all aligned around what you can achieve. Now, I've seen a lot of times where we get really close to success metrics and we just call it even, where we're like, actually, that's pretty good. This was ambitious, but we're happy with this. And that's okay if it's an executive decision. If you're wildly off, though, of course, people are going to be upset because like, if you tell your CEO that these products that you're building are going to cause like a $10 million a year increase in revenue, and they get to one, whoa, what went wrong? I think answering that question, what went wrong, is the biggest part of it. Like, we released it. It doesn't look like it's trending upwards. How do we get from 1 to 10 with this? Is it the actual product that we can actually fix? Like, is this something within our control, or is this something about we didn't understand what we were getting into, or the market, or sometimes competition just swoops out of nowhere and steals it all from you. Whatever the reason, I think the more that you think about learning from that and coming back from that, that's usually what people want to hear.
Very, very good. So yeah, you talk about in your books about how product managers are supposed to be risk mitigators, basically, and that really taps into this. I want to go back to one thing that you were mentioning earlier about these skills of product managers. We definitely have, I'm going to say, a shortage in terms of talents for product managers and people that don't necessarily have never had any training. You know, I fell into product management by accident, and I'm sure it's pretty much the case for half of our audience here. So as a leader, as a product leader in an organization, how do you train your people? How do you potentially even move people that are not product focused into the product management?
Yeah, done a lot of this this was kind of a lot of what I've done over the last 10 years. And then more last 3 or 4 years, I've been doing a lot more with boards and product strategy. So like what we did, there's a couple different ways. One, you have to make sure people are competent at the basic skills. I just saw Hamish posted on this too, that we've been training people on the craft of building software instead of the business acumen. I do think that's a big gap, the business acumen side. But the fact is too, that if they don't know how to do the processes, it's really hard to result in anything, right? Like you can't get to an output. So there's a couple different sides of the equation. It's like, if you're a CPO or product leader, VP of product, whatever you want to be, director of product even, that has like new product managers underneath them, what you want to do first is like build skills, right? So what are the essential skills that everybody needs to know to do their job on a day-to-day basis? So when I came into organizations, this was a lot of what I did, was train people in the skills. I have an online school called Product Institute. We used to put everybody through that. But then we also coach them. Now, I used to come in as an external coach and coach people all the time. What I found to be more effective is like, you hire in competent product leaders across the organization. It doesn't have to be everybody, but you got to have a mix, right, of enough people to learn from. They coach, right? It's really hard. And I get calls about this all the time. I don't do it anymore. Come in and coach our product managers. Like, it is so hard to coach a whole company up, right? It does not work. So like, you first have to fill the gaps of having somebody to learn from, whether it's peers, whether it's management, but like, there's got to be people to learn from in an organization. So you need a healthy mix, especially if you're a big organization going through a transformation, nobody's done product there. You've got to hire in. You've got to bring in some diversity of thought, and you've got to get people in who know what they're doing so that other people can look to them and be like, oh, how'd you do that? Oh, that's a template I've never seen before. Can you show me how to do it? Hey, I'm struggling with this. Can you help me? It's so much more effective than just hiring a bunch of, external coaches to come in, because eventually we leave and then it falls out. It falls back to the wayside. And I've seen that happen a lot. Like, as soon as I leave, it's out of sight, out of mind. What makes it stick is the people that actually internalize it and keep going with it. Now, I've trained a bunch of directors of product and other product managers up where they've been really, really competent, and then people can learn from them, but it takes a long time. It takes like people 1 to 2 years to get really comfortable with that. So how long do you want to spend training people is my big question. If you're a product leader, what can you do? Let's say you're competent, you know what you're doing. What do? You get them training in the basic skills, easy to send them to a course these days, get some training, Product Institute's out there if anybody's interested. You get them those basic skills. Then what you do is you start to build communities around it, and you start to share your skills too. What is everybody doing? So I think it's important to have like standardized cadences of, when do we share our roadmaps? When do we share, when do we talk about skill building? Here's the meetings that we do. Here's like everybody doing their presentations. Here's how we talk about our work, but also here's how we talk about getting better at our work too. So a lot of companies I've worked with have done things like lunch and learns, bring in external speakers, but also do internal things. Like, as a product leader, you could be like, hey, my person over there on this team has done a fantastic roadmap. Would you talk to people about how you crafted your roadmap, how you thought about it, where to do that? You do that during lunch and learns, and then people go, oh, it can happen in my organization. And that's a big hurdle. And especially like if you're taking a lot of people who fell into product management, moving them into this, a lot of times people, like, I get this all the time. People read my book and they go, it won't work here. And I say, you got to find somebody where it did work and then have them show people. And then they go, oh, we can do that. Right. So you take the success stories, you amplify them. It makes a really big difference. So I would try to increase the components like that. And then you should be thinking about coaching your people up, right? Find the people who are super strong at it, start to turn them into coaches as well. Like not like just a separate coach, but like they're a product manager, but they usually want to, climb the ladder, go director of product, be VP of product, start to give them responsibilities too, to level up the rest of their peers, and tell them that's their path for promotion as well. Like if I see you able to coach up some of these people or help these people or, start to oversee them, that's going to put you in a good position to be a director of product. That's going to be a really good way for you to get some experience, like coaching people or mentoring people or, leading people. So I would look at that too. So, and then the one other piece, standardize some things. Like I know sometimes we're like, oh, we can't standardize processes, and Agile is very like, every team can work the way that they want. Totally fine. I think from like a day-to-day basis, if you're, for the things that only happen within your team, you do whatever you want. But if it does touch the rest of the organization, this is where we have to have things like common roadmaps. This is where I start to talk about like product operations. If you have ever been on my side before where you've had to take 47 roadmaps and they're all in a different format, different levels, different goals, different way of speaking, and try to put them into a cohesive like analysis of what are we doing, you'll understand like why executives get frustrated, because they're like, I have no idea what's going on. That's where like product operations from the process standpoint comes in, is just like, for the things that don't just touch one team, how do we make a common framework across our company? How do we standardize that? Which also makes good internal mobility. So like if you have 65 teams we had 360 teams when I was working with Athena Health, like 360 product managers, like they were going to move teams eventually. You have to help make it possible for them to move teams, right? Where they don't have to relearn an entire way of working when they go from one team to another team. Like it's really hard. That's when people leave, is like when they see no internal mobility. So that's something that I would think about, is like, what are the things that we can actually start to standardize that makes it better for us as product managers and makes it easier for us to do our roles? That's a big piece of being an effective product leader too.
So there's so many things that we need to talk about now, but I think there are two things here that yet you raise. I feel like there's also a question of how do you organize your team as a product leader, right? And I know that, so I saw Jay's question about technical product managers versus non-technical. And I know that your favorite question out there is, what is the difference between a product owner and a product manager? So how do you organize this? But it's also, we see this interest on the other side around product ops, basically. And I know that you're preparing a book, I think for next year, on product ops. So there's a lot of not just the training, but also how do you organize your team and you move it forward, basically.
Yeah, I don't think that's an easy question to answer. One of the biggest questions everybody asks is like, do we align them by features, or do we align them by value streams? Do we do it by themes? Do we do it by goals? Like, there's no right answer for that. And if you're a large organization, the answer is it's going to be a mix of both. You'll probably have like some kind of, like product-based organization, and then large component or feature-based things, but other stuff might fall on a certain team. It's really hard to organize if I'm not looking at, I can't give like a straight answer on that if I'm not looking at the exact product and the makeup of the team. But there's a lot of other things that you can worry about. What I say, like best practices for that type of organization, is just reduce dependencies as much as you possibly can. Like whatever format allows you to reduce dependencies across teams and make it so that you don't have to rely on other teams to ship things. That's a good place to start. And then the second thing I would look at is, how do you make sure that people can, within their team, have broad enough scope to come up with new ideas and push it forward? So we had like, I think I talk about it in the book. Like I trained one team at a bank once, and there was a product owner around the API for login, and she wasn't allowed to work on anything except the API for login. And I was like, does it work? She's like, yeah, we can log in. And I'm like, time to move on. Like time to go to
Yeah.
the next thing, right? Like that is too narrow of a scope. So it's got to be broad enough where like you can come up with different things to do. What I like to do in really large organizations is think about it as like the director oversees like a pretty large job to be done under a product, and then multiple product managers contribute there, but you may switch around the features that solve that job to be done depending on, you know, what needs to work. So that gives you like more flexibility. But again, it's really hard to look at it if I'm not looking at the exact product. The other stuff of like organizing teams, I don't I think everybody here knows, but like I hate the product owner, product manager dichotomy. And that's because of that graph that I put in the book where it's like product managers on teams need to be largely tactical, but if you don't have any strategic or operational skills there, it's really hard to make it to the next level, because like what a CPO does, it looks very, very different than what a individual contributor or product manager does, like very, very different. But all those skills you learn working on the team, and I told my HBS students this yesterday because they all want to like not be an individual contributor or product manager and be a CPO immediately. And I was like, you can't do that. But thank you for your ambition. But I'm like, all the leadership skills you're learning at HBS are going to come in handy really, really like well one day, but you need to understand the customer, get that experience, like really grappling with problems and how to craft good solutions and see those patterns before it makes it easier to do your job as a CPO. So you need that experience, but you also need to be able to not just worry about backlogs, right? Like to really make strategic decisions about like, should we build this? How do I craft my roadmap towards cost of delay and outcomes, right? Like those types of things really contribute to being able to move into a director of product role, a VP of product role, and a CPO role. And if we only go by the scope of what people talk about with product owners and make the product managers do all the strategic stuff and the product owners only do the working with the team stuff, they can't learn those skills. Like it's really hard to learn those skills. What also happens is it doesn't scale well, because what we do is we try to push too much tactical stuff and too many backlog items onto these teams that honestly, like we should probably just be scoping and not doing. I think there's like, I think honestly, it's like larger corporations are the most, guilty of this, but like honestly, there's just like a lot of stuff we probably shouldn't be building. Like we should just be like, no, like that doesn't go. But we have all these budgets where we just try to fill those gaps. And I understand that comes from like a spending the money that you have type thing to reduce, costs and all the budgeting stuff that goes into it. But if we allow product managers on teams to be a little bit more strategic and not just worry about them refining backlogs, it gives them that exposure. It also helps us refine and focus on what we should be worrying about, not spreading ourselves too thin over like too many initiatives. So that's why I don't like the product owner, product management divide there. Also, I've seen it where like product managers are the only ones who talk to customers and stuff, and the product owners never do. That's just stupid. Like it's so hard to build empathy for your customer if you've never heard from them, if you've never seen them, if you've never talked to them. And I don't think you can be an effective product manager without doing that. And I also think that's how we get into trouble building bad products and maybe products that are detrimental to people, is when we don't empathize with them, when we can't think through all these different scenarios and edge cases and really see where they are. So I think it's really important that whatever level of product management you are, you're doing that work. You're really understanding customers, you're understanding your personas, you're talking to them, you're empathizing with your problems, because that's the only way that I think we can craft really good solutions. So that's why I promote more of the like product manager, senior product manager, individual contributors, director of product, VP of product, CPO type path. Now, really large companies, I think you can have super senior individual contributors who work more on the craft of product and work on really hard problems to solve. Like there's plenty of things like launching new products, launching very innovative stuff. Like if you were Google, I'd probably take a senior individual contributor to go explore the Alexa app for the first time, right? Like if we're going into that, why don't you do the research? Why don't you start there? There's a place for people to do that, I think, at larger places to work on really hard problems. And I think we should compensate them correctly. So I see that path, like we have senior engineers or architects, like I see that path for product managers too. I just don't think it's caught on quite a bit. When we think about product ops, it's usually when organizations start to scale where that comes into play. I started falling into product ops because I saw this need when I was helping Athena Health. Again, like we had 360 teams, 6-7 different business lines. We ran into the issue where like people were talking to the same customers over and over and over again. There was one hospital that we knew would always answer us, so we tested with them all the time, missed all the other hospitals. Yeah. Some of them don't have the same needs, right? So we were like, how do we make it easier for people to find the people to get in touch with to do user research? Not just take one team and let them do user research, but like what we built a database, we built our own software for people to catalog the user research they were doing. What were their findings? Who did they talk to? And also, like, if you need to go investigate these problems, here's the people you can talk to. Here's who has those problems. So that was something that falls under product ops. So creating the system to get user research done easier, I think, is a big part of it. Getting the data to teams. When we do growth stage product ops, the first thing that we usually implement is like having somebody go out to get the data on like, you know, which products are providing the most profit for our company, which products are providing the most profit in these customer segments, which ones, what is the cost of our sales debt? Sales debt is when you oversell your roadmap and promise things to individual customers that doesn't necessarily scale to the rest of your customers. How much money are we spending on that? You'd be surprised when you actually calculate that. Like when you start to pull that stuff together, one, it makes it easier to set product strategy. Two, it starts to inform the teams about like what's working, what's not working. And three, that's all the stuff that you need to do to communicate to the board as a CPO. So that's a huge part of product ops as well. So really, I see it as like, it's the function in an organization and gets bigger as the organization gets bigger, and it gets more specialized as it gets bigger. But it allows you to set product strategy, inform product strategy, and evaluate if your product strategy is working. So that's really what product ops is about. It's not about like, some of that has to do with standardizing roadmaps and helping to amplify them. But those should be like more like one-time things. That shouldn't be like something that somebody's working on 24/7.
Very good. And that will fall under like all these product ops and product management will fall under this CPO umbrella that is changing a lot. So I know that you have a CPO accelerator program and there is a new session that is going to start in January. I understood that if you guys are interested in joining the CPO accelerator program of Melissa Perri, the subscription is for until December 15, right? Like you can send your application.
Yep, you can apply until December 15th. We take about 20 people. We do say like you have to be managing people. You have to be like at least a senior director or above, have responsibility over your part of the organization and really work towards that and have a good solid product management background. So we do look for those criteria because we take in 20 product leaders. And it's not just, we go through 6 classes. I teach the classes every other week, but then everybody starts talking to each other in the network as well. We do one-on-one networking. And then we have mentors who are experienced CPOs who come and do panels and webinars. We're having a recruiter come in January and talk about positioning yourself for a CPO position and what do you do with your resume and stuff like that. So it's really to help people make that next leap up into the C-suite when they feel maybe like a little bit stuck or they're in the C-suite and they're like, how do I do this? Which has been a lot of people that I've worked with. So really rounding out that skill. So if you're interested, applications close December 15th, but we'll be kicking off the end of January.
Very cool. So we have a few minutes left and I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. So besides CPO Accelerator, I know you have a lot of things on your plate and a lot of things that you're running. Can you talk to us about everything that is going on, the podcast, the future books, everything? Tell us.
Yeah. Big news is I moved down south by you guys from New York City. So I live in Bluffton, South Carolina now. Cool. And so if anybody's in Hilton Head or Savannah or something, hit me up. But that's where I am most of the year. I'm literally moving out of Boston today. I'm here for the semester. I've packed up. You see the shelves are starting to get empty. But I'm subletting my place up here and then I will go back to my house there. So I moved there last year on Halloween, went through awful renovation. So it's done now, but I'm around. I love it down there. I love being warm. It's really cold. What else what am I doing? So up here in the fall, I teach at HBS. And then I have been, I've stepped away from some consulting personally. I still work with my VPs of product from Produx Labs, but I haven't been consulting as much this year to focus more on teaching and scaling those things. I'm trying to do things that touch more people at once. I've been getting deeper with a couple companies with board seats. So that I've really enjoyed because it's a lot more impact in one place. But if I'm not doing that, if I'm not going really deep with a company, I want to go broad. So CPO Accelerator, this is our fifth cohort, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, this will be our 5th cohort. So we've had over 100 people go through it. It's been really rewarding. We've had a lot of people get their first CPO roles, get promoted to the CPO. They've been gunning for those positions they came to learn. We have a really fantastic group of people in it who are just eager to share, and everybody's always contributing towards it. So I've been enjoying that a lot. Still doing Product Institute online classes. We just opened it up where you can buy individual classes. We used to do an all-in-one package subscription, but we created a bunch of other smaller classes. So there'll be some more things coming out next year too with that. But if you're interested in any of our deep dive courses, like we have ones on metrics and stuff like that, you can buy them individually now instead of just the intro to product management with it all. So I've been doing a lot there. Writing the book on product operations is definitely going on. And then the product thinking podcast too, that I launched last year or the beginning of this year. I think it was like January or February. That's been really rewarding. We have a Dear Melissa segment. So if you have any questions for me, every other Wednesday, I just answer everybody's questions. I go through them all and find ones that kind of go together. And I'll do 3 to 4 questions every other week. So if you have any just questions, it can even be deep, critical thinking questions. I'm totally fine with that. But it's a way for me to answer things that I think will help everybody instead of just emailing somebody, one person back and forth, but share the answer that can really help everybody. So if you have anything there, you go dearmelissa.com and submit me some questions. So that's been great as well. Excited to get back on the road and start speaking again when we're all allowed to. Unfortunately, I was supposed to do my first in-person workshop in Switzerland next week, and we had to cancel it because of COVID, which is sad. But I was looking forward to doing that. I'm looking forward to seeing people again. So hopefully I'll see you guys at conferences or in person soon.
Absolutely. So I think there were a lot of questions that I didn't have the time to address today. So I'm sure you're going to find a lot of them in your Dear Melissa sections next time. I really want to talk about your podcast because for me, it's the only podcast out there that is really talking about strategy and not just product management, day-to-day basics. So I really enjoy your podcast. It's really very, very interesting. So again, thank you so much, Melissa, for your time. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. And Jason, getting back to you now.
Thanks, Ode. And I want to thank you. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Ode. This has been a fantastic discussion. I've been watching the comments and the chatter going on. People really took a lot away from this. Glad to have you in the South with us, Melissa. And do hope to see you in person very soon. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back next week with our product management roundtable session. So bring your challenges, bring things you need help with. We'll connect you to people who can help you with whatever challenges that you're facing and make some recommendations for you. And look forward to chatting with everybody next week. So thanks so much and have a great day. I'm going to stop the stream and the recording.
Thank you again, Melissa.